Thank you to Yukio and Chisao for that really powerful experience. We are going to have some time after Dr. Ruff talks. We're going to have a Q&A, so if you have questions for the artists, and we'll hoping to have some time at the end of the event for folks who didn't get a chance to come up and look at the paintings directly. Just spend some time doing that as well. So, technical stuff there. I'll go ahead and start introducing Dr. Tillman Ruff, who is the co-president of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which Physicians for Social Responsibility is the local affiliate. So it's great to be related to that project and to be part of bringing you here to Portland. He is also the founding chair of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or Ican, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. And Tilman actually has a replica of the Nobel Peace Prize here tonight, so you can also stick around and get a chance to see that. So the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Ican for its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons. Dr. Ruff is Associate Professor at Nassau Institute for Global Health at the University of Melbourne and an International Medical Advisor to the Australian Red Cross. He has contributed to the development of travel medicine, hepatitis B control, immunization, and maternal and child health in Indonesia and Pacific Island countries, and he serves on the WHO Western Pacific Hepatitis B Expert Resource Panel. He was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for service to the promotion of peace as an advocate for the abolition of nuclear weapons and to public health through the promotion of immunization programs in the Southeast Asia Pacific region. So I believe the title of the talk or this evening is Before They End Us, the New Global Movement to End Nuclear Weapons and Protect Planetary Health. And I hope I went on long enough that you're about ready to start.
Looks like it's coming.
All right, here we go.
Thanks very much, Kelly, and thank you all for coming, and thank you for the warm welcome to my first visit to Portland. So, after that very moving presentation, I'd like to just talk a little about the consequences and dangers of nuclear weapons, because I think every discussion about nuclear weapons really needs to be anchored in that reality. But then spend most of the time talking about the process that got us to this historic treaty, and then say a little bit about the treaty, but particularly how we can use it to advance the necessary work towards nuclear elimination. So, these two statements of Albert Einstein's really resonate with me repeatedly. Those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act, and just how much the development of nuclear weapons needs to change our thinking. Even calling them weapons is not really what they should be called. I was at a meeting in Oslo a couple of weeks ago with the president of the Norwegian Red Cross, who's a lieutenant general, a very senior military figure, and he said, a weapon that can't distinguish between combatants and civilians is not a military weapon. The bomb that all of that grief and trauma, that it's so important that people learn about. If one of those Hiroshima bombs were dropped every 2 hours since the end of 1945, you would not have finished yet to reach the current nuclear arsenal, even though we've thankfully managed to eliminate 50,000 of these weapons since their Cold War peak. The World Health Organization, when it considered the impacts of nuclear war on health and health services, concluded that they constitute the greatest immediate threat to health and welfare. And they concluded that even one weapon on a city was beyond the capacity of any health service or combination of health services to offer any meaningful response. So the only logical approach is prevention. What we've learned about the impacts of nuclear weapons in recent years, the most dramatic findings that should resonate through all of the thinking about them and policies around them, is really evidence that highlights the fragility of the global climate in a couple of different ways, and just how crucial a stable and hospitable human climate is for human health and well-being. When people think about climate disruption, they of course think about global warming. But not many people know that the greatest risk of acute climate disruption is actually from nuclear weapons. It's estimated that that relatively small tactical-sized weapon that destroyed Hiroshima released about 1,000 times as much energy in the fires that it ignited as the explosive yield of the weapon. Nuclear weapons are extraordinarily efficient at igniting over very large areas, essentially everything flammable that will burn. And the largest weapons are still 5 megatons in size. If you put one of those on the centre of this fair city, then an area from Hillsborough to Troutdale and north to Salmon Creek and south to New Era would essentially burn 1,600 square kilometres, more than 800 degrees Celsius, consuming most of the oxygen, and essentially nothing could survive in that area. If just 100 Hiroshima-sized weapons were used in a war between India and Pakistan, less than a third of the weapons that they possess, less than 0.5% of the global nuclear arsenal, it would put 5 or 6 million tonnes of smoke high into the atmosphere, where it would essentially blanket the inhabited regions of the Earth. And this is as if you took a cross-section through the atmosphere from the South Pole to the North Pole. Very quickly that smoke would go way beyond the area at the bottom, the troposphere where our weather happens, where there are clouds and rain, right up into the stratosphere and beyond, where it would persist for decades, cooling, darkening and drying the global climate. It would also very dramatically accelerate the destruction of ozone that protects us from ultraviolet radiation, producing ultraviolet radiation levels around the world that we really haven't seen since life came out of the oceans. That has impacts for human skin and eyes and immune systems, but it also has very toxic effects that interfere with growth and development for a wide variety of plants and animals on land and also in the oceans. So this is all not going to be very good for food production. So far, the detailed scientific studies that we have really just look at these simple physical effects, what happens from colder, darker, drier on the major food crops in the world. That leaves out a whole range of other impacts. The loss of land to radioactive and chemical contamination that would follow a nuclear war, the ozone effect and the ultraviolet that I've mentioned, but also the disruption to the global trade in seed, fertiliser, fuel, transport that underpins modern agriculture. So this is very much a conservative estimate, and it suggests that in the US and China, the two largest grain producers globally, production would decline by 15 to 40% in the first 5 years and about half that in the second 5 years. That, combined with the more than 800 million people that are currently hungry in the world, and the fact that global grain reserves are never more than about 3 months' consumption, would put billions of people at risk of starvation in proportion to their current food insecurity, even if they live on the other side of the planet. If you put this on a scale of perspective, this is the blue is the global warming trend of about 1 degree so far that is arousing so much justified concern. The little red line is the rapid drop that we would see with such a relatively small-scale regional nuclear war. If just the weapons that are still on high alert between Russia and the United States were targeted on cities, it would essentially get us to 5 degrees average cooling, which is about Ice Age conditions, but very precipitously. And if the long-range weapons that the US and Russia have, now that both sides have fully implemented the new START commitments, were used, then it would get us down to twice as cold as that. It's hard to see humankind and many larger creatures surviving that kind of severe, prolonged global ice age. So the appropriate way to think about these things is not mutually assured destruction as the sort of theoretical underpinning for what rational states will do facing unacceptable threats, but that any risk is essentially suicidal, that these are really global suicide bombs that simply mustn't be used. So, where are we, how are we tracking in getting rid of these awful things? Well, it's a mixed bag and two very divergent trends, but much of what is happening is not particularly positive. None of the nuclear armed states is currently disarming. There are no real negotiations yet underway, some promising dialogue in Korea notwithstanding, but yet to be bedded down in anything that will stick. And we're seeing the really vital agreements that have put constraints on nuclear proliferation, hard won at the end of the Cold War, being eroded, being abandoned, and possibly even the Test Ban Treaty apparently. Perhaps even worse than that, all of the nuclear armed states are investing massively, huge sums of money over decades-long timeframes to refurbish the whole complex that produces these weapons and basically rebuild new weapons that are more flexible, more accurate, more dangerous. So not so good. The architects of the INF Treaty have recently, George Shultz and Mikhail Gorbachev has recently, in two twin pieces in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, just highlighted just how dangerous is unravelling these constraints that was so hard won. We all know that things go wrong in complex human and technical systems, even not so complex ones. Nuclear war has almost happened repeatedly because of combinations of human and technical error. It's unlikely that they will stop anytime soon. Daniel Ellsberg, in his remarkable book, The Doomsday Machine, that I would strongly commend to you if you haven't seen it, documents that all of the nuclear armed states have also considered the use of nuclear weapons first, and documents pretty comprehensively that 25 known instances when the US threatened such use. We've seen a really alarming escalation in quite irresponsible and very explicit threats to use nuclear weapons, not just between the US and North Korea, but in India and Pakistan, between NATO and Russia, and also in the Middle East. Many of those who've been involved in managing nuclear weapons in the past, like Bill Perry and Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov, have highlighted that in their assessment, the dangers of nuclear weapons being used are as high as they have ever been. And many of you will be aware that this year the hands of the doomsday clock were moved forward to 2 minutes to midnight, as far forward as they have ever been. Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has in a context where usually diplomatic words are fairly understated, pretty starkly highlighted that we live in dangerous times and are essentially in a new Cold War. Two trends that concern me significantly are that we're seeing a very sharp upswing in the last decade or so in the number of armed conflicts in the world that involve a state outside the area of actual conflict. And many of those states so involved are nuclear armed. Each of these involves a small risk of nuclear escalation. Many of these conflicts are driven by the growing reality of food and water insecurity and population displacement that are what climate change starting to bite means. A climate-stressed world is not a safer place for nuclear weapons. The other new trend is the difficult, complex, probably almost ungovernable morass of cyber technology used for malevolent purposes. We've seen this directed against nuclear and civilian organisations in a variety of countries against North Korean missiles. This is now a reality. The Government Accounting Office here, many others, have confirmed that nuclear command and control systems, early warning systems, are vulnerable to that kind of attack, which is not just available to states, but also to non-states. Even the computers of the US National Security Agency were extensively hacked late last year. So, disarmament couldn't be more firmly embedded in our collective expression that tries to protect the health and security of the world's people. The very first resolution of the United Nations in 1946 called for the elimination of atomic weapons. We should remind ourselves that while the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty poses an obligation on all states to negotiate in good faith towards nuclear disarmament, the highest legal authority in the world, the International Court of Justice, has made it clear that that obligation is not just to negotiate, but actually to bring negotiations to a conclusion, to finish the job. We should take courage from the fact that we have made very significant progress in controlling other kinds of inhumane and indiscriminate weapons through treaties that prohibit biological and chemical weapons, landmines and cluster munitions. There's a common thread. In each case, evidence that these weapons can only have indiscriminate effects, however they're used, has provided the basis for codifying that these are unacceptable for any state in a treaty, which has then provided the basis and motivation for progressive efforts to eliminate them. And all of these weapons are now less often produced, stockpiled, distributed, traded, deployed and used than they used to be. Not perfect, but very significant progress. Everything that you can say that's horrible and indiscriminate about a cluster munition or a landmine is of course much worse with nuclear weapons. So that really provides the kind of basis for why Ican was formed, really inspired by the international campaign to ban landmines, with the aim of building a global civil society coalition around the goal of a treaty-based process to ban and eliminate the worst of all weapons based on their unacceptable humanitarian consequences. Helpful in that process of building support for a treaty-based process, a little bit short on delivery, but strong and promising initial rhetoric was your President's commitment to affirming the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons really in the mainstream political agenda in a way that it hadn't been since the Reagan-Gorbachev era, I guess, of the mid-80s. That was helpful in encouraging a number of other actors, in particular the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, the world's largest humanitarian organisation, to in 2010 really make the abolition of nuclear weapons, this unfinished humanitarian business, a major priority for the world's largest humanitarian organisation. That encouraged a number of states to make sure that in the 2010 review conference of the NPT, these are consensus statements, so every government has signed on to these, for the first time expressing deep concern about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. And that then led to 3 really landmark conferences. The first time governments had ever actually sat down together to discuss the impacts of the weapons, more than 70 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More than 80% of the world's governments attended. In Oslo, NATO in Mexico, and then in Vienna in 2013 and 14. Updated evidence presented. Really no significant challenge to these conclusions, that any use of nuclear weapons would be an unmitigated catastrophe for which no effective response was possible, that the risks have been underestimated and probably growing and exist as long as the weapons do, and that there is a legal gap that sees the last weapon of mass destruction, the worst of all, the major category of weapon not to be prohibited by an international treaty. That led to the Austrian government, Sebastian Kurz, then the Foreign Minister, now the Chancellor. He was 27 years old then, he's younger than my son. He made a pledge on behalf of Austria to want to work to fill that legal gap and invited other governments to join. And within a relatively short space of months, there were 2/3 of the world's governments joined up. Clearly there's an enormous amount of concern about the threat and frustration about the failure of the nuclear armed states to disarm. In the next couple of years, it really there was work to build a consensus about what the next best step was, how best to fill that legal gap, and a bit about how to do it. And of course, the fundamental dilemma here is that, unfortunately, the states that don't own the weapons can't actually eliminate them. So what can they do? And based on that historical experience, what they can do, if they choose a forum that can't be blocked, for example by a requirement for consensus, is prohibit the weapon and go a long way to stigmatising them. One of the most important ways of doing this work, of course, is building coalitions, and that's important in so many respects of getting stuff done that influences the policies of governments. Many of you are associated with PSR and otherwise with the health sector. One of the things I'm really proud of in this process was that IPPNW was able to very naturally, easily, they didn't take a lot of convincing, to get the largest global health federations singing from the same hymn sheet. The World Medical Association, the World Federation of Public Health Associations, and the International Council of Nurses, in a whole series of working papers and submissions and commentary and oral testimony to the UN General Assembly, its working groups, and the treaty negotiations, speaking with united voice of the world's health professionals that getting rid of nuclear weapons was an urgent health imperative. So at the end of 2016, by a vote of over 3-1 in the United Nations General Assembly, a mandate for negotiations to commence was passed, with a very ambitious time frame, almost, you might say, a little unrealistic. So this was passed in early December, so sunset was 7th of July. 8 months later. If you haven't finished, you turn into pumpkins, start all over again. So a deadline, a really firm deadline. And you've only got 4 weeks of negotiations to do it. A week in March and 3 weeks in June, July. It's a pretty tall order to negotiate a new treaty to ban nuclear weapons, and by the way, while you're at it, try and kick the can down the road towards their elimination as far as you can. It was very ably chaired by Elaine White Gomez, who is an absolute hero of this process, the Costa Rican ambassador in Geneva. Many of you will recognise Ira Hoffman, I think he was spoken in this place before, and Alan Roebuck, who's responsible for much of those climate data that I showed you. These negotiations were really historic in a number of respects, including the very strong presence and partnership of the governments that really wanted to move this with civil society, with survivors, with experts. Even during the negotiations, we had opportunities to present and remind the diplomats of why their work was so important. I'm particularly happy to say this after that moving initial presentation. The second thing that I'm really proud of about these negotiations was that we made sure that in all of the lead-up, in the humanitarian conferences, in every one of the meetings between them and the negotiations, and throughout the negotiations, survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki and survivors of nuclear testing around the world were there. They could speak, they could be heard, their voices prominent. The facts and data about nuclear weapons are crucial, but they can be very difficult to engage with, very remote, very hard to grasp, very distant from ordinary reality of our lives, very disempowering. Awful to think about. What can make this real and really connect with people is the lived stories. The lived stories of people for whom nuclear weapons are not some abstract great power chess game, but a lived daily reality of suffering and displacement and loss and ill health across generations. So having these people there and courageously providing their testimony cut through like nothing else. You could hear a pin drop when they spoke. And I'm really proud that they came and they were heard. When it came to the vote, because unfortunately the 9 nuclear-armed states and the 30-odd states that in addition claim protection from, as it happens, US nuclear weapons through NATO or through other agreements for Japan, South Korea and Australia, my country, stayed away, pretty much all of the rest of the world voted for this treaty. So it was really an overwhelming vote and a really historic moment of great emotion, particularly for the survivors. There's Setsuko Thurlow, the Hiroshima survivor who played such a crucial role in getting the treaty up with the conference president. All of the diplomats who negotiated that agreement have said that this would not have happened without the organised civil society partnering through Ican. So nuclear weapons are now well on the way to being on the same unacceptable legal footing as those other prohibited weapons. Let me just say a few things about this treaty. If you haven't seen it or read it, it's only a very slim document. You should carry it with you at all times. It's a beautiful thing. It's really happy reading. Its preamble is a very accurate summary of why we need to get rid of these weapons. It provides a totally comprehensive and categorical prohibition of nuclear weapons. It's got commitments for states that join it to help look after victims and remediate contaminated environments. And very importantly, it's got what's currently the only mapped out pathway to act for all states to actually fulfil and deliver on their commitment to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. Whether you've got weapons or you haven't, there's a pathway to join, to finish the job through this treaty, and currently it's the only place where that's defined. There's no other roadmap that's agreed or laid out, especially not in a binding international, what will be a binding international agreement. So I think that's of great importance, especially as the architecture of the constraints we have get unravelled as they seem to be headed. The Red Cross has repeatedly highlighted that banning the weapons is a crucial basis for their elimination and highlighted the historic nature of the treaty. Let me share with you what, in some contrasting sentiments, your government says about the treaty. Along all of the nuclear-armed states have opposed this treaty. It challenges their claimed unique right to possess nuclear weapons. The US, they have come up with various justifications for that view, that this would be divisive, would undermine the NPT, it wouldn't dismantle a single nuclear weapon, it'll never be joined by the nuclear-armed states, it doesn't have adequate safeguards provisions, all of which are untrue, by the way. But what were they telling their NATO allies when coming up to the crucial UN vote? They were saying, vote no, and if these negotiations happen, you mustn't join them. They were saying that this treaty would stigmatise nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence. Yes. That it could impact even states that don't join the treaty, even before it enters into force. Nice. That it would be inconsistent with NATO's nuclear war planning and nuclear weapons sharing. Yes. The reasons they opposed this treaty is because it would work as intended. Don't believe me, don't trust me that this treaty matters. This treaty matters. And something that I wasn't planning to talk about in detail before I came here, but seems to have been of great interest to people around the United States when I've mentioned it, is that you should know that your government, even under the Obama administration, has been involved in opposing this process very actively and still now putting pressure on countries not to sign this treaty. The nastiest example that I'm aware of is that Laos, the poorest country in Southeast Asia, the most heavily landmined country on earth, most of them US slave mines, was threatened with cessation of its funding for demining if it didn't vote against these treaty negotiations. Not much of this is well documented, but you should know that your government and others, France, Russia and the UK in particular, have been very active in opposing this treaty at every stage, and it's not been nice. This is a bit busy, but let me just pick out a couple of things about this. It's not just the treaty that's important, but the process. And I think for me this helps to explain why the opposition has been so fierce. This treaty has brought global democracy and humanity to nuclear disarmament in a way that hasn't happened before. This is the first nuclear treaty on a humanitarian basis, led by the states without the weapons, that the nuclear armed states couldn't stop, organised, negotiated in the United Nations General Assembly, the most inclusive and democratic and fundamental organ of the United Nations. This fundamentally changes the game about how nuclear business is done, and that's one of the reasons why they don't like it so much, so fiercely, I think. So for the states that don't sign this treaty anytime soon, you know, what does it matter? How can we use this treaty? I think it really does provide a moment of truth that puts them on the spot more than anything else has done in my 40 years of working